When I was living in another country, which the gun was not an issue, I would not take upon myself to do this campaign, an anti-violence campaign. But I see the need to do something about it if we want to keep our, culture non-violence and keep the culture away from violence. That's the only thing I want to see and I want to do. If we had another violent culture, which unfortunately we have, like in some other countries like Canada and Switzerland, they have a lot of guns too. Not that I agree, but they would not have, as you saw in our statistic, we didn't have as many gun problems. So it really depends. One instrument is not bad or good, it's how we use it and what causes it does. The gun by itself would not jump up and kill someone. That's true, like somebody has to go and get it. But in the same time, if we did not have that gun, the person could not kill as easily as many as a mass killing. Because if you use your hand or your fist, you could injure one or two. We would not have as massacres that we have seen in this country, for sure. No, we can go so far. If the knife is going to be used, to kill, that would be bad too. But we have to be reasonable and we have to really see what's going on in the world. We cannot just say. I know that they use that a lot, and I have heard them. I know they use that a lot, or they say the same thing. They say, "Oh, so we have to ban the cars because the cars almost kill people." That's true. You cannot do that, but because there is a purpose for car. Car is needed for people to go from one area to other. If they need it to transport, they need to go to work. It's needed, but gun by itself.
How about target shooting with guns?
Okay,
and I think Dr. Woodall, yes, also has something to add.
Now, I would like to see statistically how many people we have that really want to do target shooting, comparatively with the people who like the gun. And by all due respect, I want to also say that I know personally people who are gun lovers or believe in Second Amendment and they even have the gun, but they are very responsible. I'm not talking about those people because they know they keep it away from the kids without any ammunition, locked out in a good place. I personally don't like gun, but I respect them because they are right people. And most of them, believe it or not, maybe 80 or 90% of these good, law-abiding citizens which love guns, they would not like not to have the background check, for instance, like lots of gun enthusiasts, keeping them from background check. I don't understand that why we cannot background check a criminal and make sure he's out of the society so our kids or people don't get killed.
Right. Dr. Woodall?
No, thank you. Cars don't kill people, bad drivers kill people. But because bad drivers kill people, we regulate cars. And we regulate who can drive one. And we regulate their access to a car. And if they're irresponsible in any way, they can pose a threat to the public, they're not allowed to drive. The same common sense does not hold sway with the possession of a gun in this country. So the argument that guns don't kill people, people kill people, is actually an argument for gun regulation, as far as I see, number one. Number two, as a physician and as a psychiatrist, if I'm working in an inpatient service in a hospital, 80 to 90% of the people who come into that service are there because of a suicide attempt. I never see suicide attempts from guns because they're dead. All the other suicide attempts, they get another chance at life. They come in, we help them with their despair, their sense of isolation, their sense of depression, and sense of being overwhelmed. And 3 days later, they thank God that they have another chance. Those who try suicide with a gun, 19,000 a year who die, are dead. They don't get another chance. So the availability of guns is an issue. Now, if you took those statistics that said, what was the number, that are murdered by guns? Something like 15.
More.
And 16 times more than the next 25 countries combined. Even if you look at per capita use of guns, so let's say Canada was 263 deaths by gun per year. But the United States has 10 times more people than Canada. Oh, it was 610. 610 murders in Canada per year with a gun. But the United States has 10 times more people. So our murder rate is 15,000 something. So, but even if you multiply by 10, the 610, that's still 6,100. That's still less than half of the number of people killed in the United States. So there's something about availability and the lack of registration and restriction of gun use that is likely accounting for the deaths that separate us from other countries. I think we really get manipulated by powerful forces that, remember the fear and the anger I was talking about? Those forces in society that would love to make money by selling you more guns are actually, and the NRA has admitted this, because 20 years ago, the same vice president of the NRA, who is now advocating for no restrictions on guns, there's the congressional video of him saying the NRA was strongly behind the idea of healthy registration laws for gun ownership. What's happened in the United States since that time is the number of people buying guns is going down. So you have to sell more guns to the people who are buying them. So to do that, their marketing campaign is to scare those gun owners into thinking that the government wants to take their guns away from them. Nobody serious in Washington wants to take people's guns away from them. But they would like to restrict access to guns to people who are irresponsible and make sure that responsible gun owners are using those guns responsibly. We have a Second Amendment. It's not going away anytime soon. But so anyway, I'd just like to make those points. That bumper sticker slogans that people kill guns, guns don't kill guns, these are ignorant comments. They are not well informed. They are ways that marketing experts in the gun industry or political parties are trying to manipulate you into not thinking about what the issues really are. To me, there are 19,000 people who are dead every single year that I don't get a chance to treat. So until someone who is selling a gun can answer to me, how are we going to help those people instead of just let them die or call them selfish, then I don't think your argument is valid. And I don't think that you're being reasonable or compassionate.
Excellent. Any of our panel would like to add to that?
Well, I guess I would like to add to it. As you know, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and so I always look at these cultural contexts of these kinds of issues. And so the construction of masculinity in our society has just gotten so extreme and so violent. I mean, you mentioned the media, the glorification of guns and violence in movies, on TV, the glorification of extreme violence even in our professional sports teams these days is getting, kind of scary, if you don't mind my saying. And so there's something going on here that has to do with gender relations and power relations, and I agree fully marketing is speaking to this, that is creating this sort of aggression that's somehow glorified and supported in our culture. And it doesn't need to be that way. I think one of the things we can do in terms of gun violence and male violence in general is to look at how men are constructed. How do we teach our little boys to treat other little kids, on the playground? Is it that, we're going to have these little boys sit down and try and work out their issues and problems in a given confrontation on the playground? Or do we tell them to, well, they hit you, you go ahead and hit it back, you little man? These kinds of constructions. Now, I know that the people in this room hopefully aren't participating in those kinds of, masculinity models for their children.
Thank you for the tailored question to my point of view. It's actually frustrating to talk about guns for me, partly because of what we just came from, but also, as your question implies, I think it's really the symptom and not the disease. Although I think it's a symptom that's lethal. But the issue really does get back to what are a core set of skills and perceptions and contexts that we live in, that without those things in place, you have things like drug abuse, gun violence or any kind of violence, teen pregnancy, political discord, war. It seems to me that what we're missing is a core set of understandings that without them we have a variety of types of symptomatology. So as a society, we tend to focus on the symptoms and not on the core issues. And it seems to me that the purpose of this foundation that's sponsoring this symposium and these workshops is to start to consider what the symptoms are symptoms of. What are the core issues? So back to your question then, to me it's a circular argument. Should we be educating or should we be regulating guns? My answer is yes.
Do it all.
Yes, we should be civilizing ourselves more. And again, it seems to me that this let's pick a side, are you on the pro-gun side or the anti-gun side, is so ignorantly simplistic that why are we letting ourselves as a society get sucked into that dichotomy? Do we really want to, that's what we meant before about, do we have to have an 18th century conversation? Do we have to put things in such obviously simplistic, never-ending conflictual context that there is no answer for that? So we really need to step back, and your generation really has to be careful about not getting sucked into arguments that are so specious, so vacuous, so vapid, so utterly unsatisfying, that is to perpetuate constant conflict in the society. So all that to say, I go back to this notion that Habib brought up earlier. It's a process of enlightenment, really, to free ourselves from these formulaic kind of views of the world that would put us into categories that are opposed to each other. It's the sign of an adolescent mind. That's what adolescents do. But at some point we need to become adults and start thinking as adults. And I would ask and invite all of the students in this classroom to just start assuming your adulthood. And start assuming when people are putting you or issues into categories of left or right, black or white, this or that you are being duped. You are being duped, and you are being asked to be stupid. I'm sorry for the blunt language, but you are being asked, you are being manipulated to be stupid. Because nothing in life is that simple. And if things are put in those categories, you are being, I would suggest, manipulated. There is a marketing force behind that dichotomy. There is a political agenda behind that dichotomy. There is a religious fundamentalism behind that dichotomy, all of which does not serve our common humanity.
Well, reading books doesn't make a person really enlightened. There is a very famous passage by, I believe it is attributed to Muhammad, that compares the learner to a donkey that carries books but doesn't know what is it carrying. Like getting a degree, getting a PhD, getting a doctorate.
Be careful now.
No, I'm just talking about myself. All of these things have a purpose. In themselves, they are a means. Enlightenment means free yourself from preconceived notions that limits you and creates boundaries that are artificial between you and your fellow human beings. So enlightenment means to see things the way that they actually are, not the way that they seem to be. Enlightenment, in short, means recognize your own biases and try to be brave to question your own belief system. And do not bend down, as dear John said, to something that can separate you from your own true innermost self. That is called enlightenment.
Excellent. Which also refers to becoming a critical thinker, and too bad Dr. Nayeri had to leave. I think you heard the questions were going to be hard. And so he's not here to answer that question. However, combining enlightenment with critical thinking, are they related and in what way?
Critical thinking, in fact, as Ali also mentioned, is a methodology to become enlightened. Critical thinking is not enlightenment. The people can become good critical thinkers, good scientists, but they may not see the connection. This is why when they ask people such as Socrates, then later on you can see by Rumi, later on you see by Abdul Baha Abbas, Baha'u'llah, that what is enlightenment? It says enlightenment is to see the reality within everything and never try to create a pseudo-reality which only benefits you. How do we do that? He says there is a processes which we call it critical thinking, the power of imagination. Imagine what the world would be if there was no gun. The power of thinking. What is that? Thinking means to understand the elements of that imagination. And then the power of comprehension. What is that? Is finding the essential relationship between the elements that make up your power of imagination. And then, after you have imagination, you have thinking, you have comprehension, then, and only then, you have to say the reality which is beyond me, beyond you, but we are a part of that bigger reality. That is what creates insight and light.
Excellent.
I don't know if you know who Shams was to Rumi, but
Right.
not claiming that I'm Rumi, but this man is my Shams. I'm just wanting to let you know that. Shams was the inspiration to Rumi. If there were one issue I would suggest, it's how you manage your own powerlessness. That's the root inner conflict. We all are confronted with our powerlessness in some way. My father was an alcoholic and I didn't know how to move through my childhood. My mother was a drug addict. Someone died in my family. There's some oppression that I've experienced. There's a death, like a tragedy like Newtown. There's something. If you were to write down right now the one conundrum, the one dilemma that life has handed you that makes you feel utterly powerless, and were to write, you can trace back to what that is by just tracing back some fear you have, a fear of being rejected, an anger you have of being treated unfairly. If you keep tracing that back to some issue that you feel powerless over, that is the thing that is either holding you back or is the key to your enlightenment, right? So if we trace that back and then find some way to have the seed of that powerlessness be turned into a robe of compassion. Right? If you can find a way for that thing that is ultimately the thing that scares you, ultimately the thing that your psyche runs from. If only people knew this about me. If only this thing ever gets revealed, then my life is terrible. Whatever that little core thing is, if you find a way to get that same issue to turn into the link of compassion that binds you with others, then you've begun the path of enlightenment. And whatever gets you there is your path. It's your art, it's your devotion. It will certainly involve your humility, and it will certainly at some point involve your joy, and your deepest joy. So no theologies will do it for you. I mean, they may be boats that lead you, but the work each of us is required to do on our own, and each of us must help each other to do. We're actually talking too much. There's actually some questions. Anger is almost always a flag. It's a flag that something is unfair. Right? So in so much as the anger can lead you to a clarification of what the injustice is, expressing the anger is very healthy. But the expression of the anger isn't the healthy part. The uncovering of the injustice is the healthy part, right? And because we're not hydraulic systems where pressure builds up and then we just tap off the steam and we're healthy. So it's not that we build up fear and suddenly we just express the fear and we're healthy. But once we trace the fear back to an assumption about the world, that, I'm a vulnerable person and I can never do anything good, and if people find out, oh my God, I'm going to fall apart. Some kind of an assumption about the world that the fear leads you back to, where you can then now look at that assumption and say, you know what, maybe I'm not that, maybe that's something I just put together when I was 6 years old. Maybe I'm really not that. Maybe I'm much more than that. In so much as the emotion takes you back to an assumption about yourself that is really maybe not valid anymore, it's healthy. But the expression of the emotion of itself is not healthy. In itself, it's not the goal. It's only the boat that leads you to the destination. And the reason that that's important is because if we think the issue is the anger itself and the expression of the anger itself, we never mature in our perceptual ability to get to the roots of what's unfair in our lives, and more importantly, about the assumptions we make about our lives. Right? So that's the answer I would give to that.
Excellent. Mr. Riazati?
We have two terminology in psychology. They say react versus response. When you react instantly to emotion which may not be justified. And as Krishna says in Gita, when you react based on emotion and you feel that you actually get nourished, you actually be filled with emptiness that you want to again increase that emotional reaction. What we are saying is anger might be a symptom, but find the root cause of that symptom and deal with it systematically. Because when you escape from that opportunity to become mature because of the trouble that you have, you again repeat the same mistake in a different context. So what we are saying here, I believe, if I understand it correctly, there is always a way to deal with stress. In fact, if somebody tells you they do not have an stress, you have to send them to psychiatrists, right? Or psychologists. Stress is a part of human life. The nobility of human being is how to deal with stress. Do we deal with stress in a way to escape, to belittle ourselves, or we use stress as an opportunity for growth and nobility? And one thing that my dear friend John mentioned, that I believe it is at the core of all of this subject, is when the people feel weak, they respond emotionally and irrationally. But also, if they use rationalization to cover up their fear increases. What we are saying is, the way to deal with weakness is through a noble strength. The more you become knowledgeable about the root causes of any problem, you will see your whole mindset will change about that problem. And when your mindset changes, your feelings changes. And when your feeling changes, your behavioral response changes. I am not preaching cognitive behavioral therapy as a remedy, but I am actually saying our belief system about ourselves, about security, about what is my strength, and how we look at our own nature, that generates our emotion. And it is in that context that we have to look at guns, in my opinion.
Yes.
You see that?
That's excellent.
Wow, well, I've seen quite an array of different human responses to, you know, these forms of social violence that I study. What's striking me about being on this panel today is the wisdom here in terms of that personal sort of moment of growth that we all strive for. And what I can say is, and this sounds perhaps a little bit, you know, like a cliche, but it is so fundamentally true that I do believe in the human spirit has this tremendous capacity to move past trauma if given a chance. And people do, and I've heard those stories over and over and over again. I mean, in South Africa, I guess we're all, well, we may not all be, but, you know, they went through this process of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission rather than have Nuremberg-style trials that would put the perpetrators of these vicious apartheid acts, you know, on trials in the Nazi Germany sort of model, and they rejected that model and said no, that they would rather come together and go through a process of testimony that would allow people to tell their stories, and in telling their stories could get confirmation and support from each other. And, you know, I was lucky enough to go to some of those hearings. I'm trying to think what year I went. Anyway, I went to some of the hearings specifically geared for women, because one of the early criticisms of the TRC was that there were so many men getting up and giving testimonies about their various experiences, either as, you know, sort of victims or recipients of this horrendous direct and structural violence, or as even perpetrators, you know, standing up publicly and saying, I was wrong. And women were reluctant to come forward because it just wasn't a safe enough place for them, because they had to talk about things such as, you know, personal assault and rape and very personal moments of torture. And yet women did, once given a safe space with the support so that they could stand up and tell these stories. And this process was really pretty remarkable in the way it moved this society forward. Now, having said that, it only goes so far. You know, in South Africa today, there still is a tremendous amount of trauma. There still is a tremendous amount of structural violence of a different sort than apartheid. And so people in that society are still trying to struggle to survive and heal. And what I can say is I'm always impressed when I go into various communities. Most of my research has taken place in urban townships outside of Johannesburg. And it is truly remarkable to go into people's homes and see the kind of compassion that they are still able to give to each other, their families. It's really pretty humbling.
What I would like you to consider is, what is the purpose of your life on this planet individually, and what do you think could be done by you during your life to contribute to the well-being of humankind?
Thank you. Dr. Stevenson?
I'm very taken with this notion of enlightenment, as it's been discussed today, and I think that is really our personal journey, you know, what we assign to ourselves, to how we want to live our lives out. And I spoke earlier about structural violence as opposed to, you know, direct violence, and I think that we can change some of this structural violence. And in our moments of enlightenment, I believe that it is our duty to create around us, not only within ourselves, but within our communities, the political will to make those changes in our social structures and our social institutions. So I'm very, very pleased to be here and be part of this conversation.
Thank you. Dr. Vidal?
It's hard.
You said one,
You're on the
but
clock.
you
It's
said
hard.
you said 1 minute or 1 point.
Yeah.
And I can make 1 point in about
It's
3
your
hours. Okay. I think it would be this, that all of us will be dealt by life events or experiences that cause us to feel powerless. And that in that moment of powerlessness, fear naturally arises, and perhaps anger after it, a whole series of dominoed emotions after that. And to me, faith is not a set of beliefs, it's not a doctrine or a dogma, although that's the way we use the word in our culture, perhaps most cultures. But faith is what you do with that powerlessness in that moment of potential despair, where somehow human beings are capable of finding a source of strength that's beyond the personal definitions of ourselves. You know, find the larger self with the capital S that Habib referred to. It's at that moment, if we can find a way in our own lives to deal with that powerlessness in a way where a power bigger than us moves, or somehow it's a part of us, but it's not the way we usually think of ourselves. To me, faith is that confidence. So whatever we can do in our lives to increase our assurance of that availability of power, so that we're not drawn into fear or anger and keep the cycle of suffering going in our own lives. That, to me, is the driving force of personal transformation and global transformation.
Thank you. Dr. Kilmer?
Right. I'm very hopeful that, and I believe in it, that peace is possible. And the only thing we need, that we guys need to want it. We have to want it. And then do not forget the people's power. I believe very strongly in people's power. If you really want in each one of us, start from today. Be the peace that you want to see in the world. So start by yourself, with your neighbors, with your household, mom, dad, brother, sister, name it. And start nonviolence and start wanting. And first say what violence is or what peace is, what you really want to have. And I have a dream that I always write underneath my signature, which says, I have a dream that one day we all live in a peaceful world. It may take many, many years. I don't think like our project would be a quick fix at all. It's something maybe it takes hundreds of years. But what I want to say today, that do not lose hope. Don't think because our world looks like a war zone, it has to be. No, we can change it. We do not have to accept whatever we see and we have around us and believe that it's normal part of life. We have to resensitize, as I said, please resensitize, think about peace, think about all this violence around us, and start doing something very little, very small. It doesn't matter. If maybe a drop, I always say, like what I do maybe is a drop, not in a pool, it's like drop in the ocean. It may not work, but I believe it does one day, and I never give up. So I hope you don't.